Sustainable development is broadly defined as development which meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. The drive for economic growth has resulted in problems such as environmental degradation and social disparities. Sustainable development prescribes for a more balanced approach to growth that progresses development across three underlying pillars: social inclusion, environmental sustainability, and economic prosperity. Quality of life assessments have told us that economic growth does not equate to happiness or a sense of well-being. As the global population increases, so too does the pressure on our biosystem and social equity. Sustainable development calls for the adoption of more responsible consumption and production patterns. The Industrial Revolution brought about unprecedented economic growth and many advances such as electricity. Coal has generally been an affordable source of energy for much of the world, but it has come at a huge cost to the environment and society. Coal is a finite resource, which produces harmful greenhouse gases that have largely contributed to climate change. A more sustainable approach is to adopt energy-efficient technologies and diversify our energy supply. Renewable energy, such as wind, solar, and biomass, is an alternative energy source, which doesn't pose harmful effects to our health and our environment. New renewable energy technologies can also represent new economic opportunities. The Sustainable Development Goals in Egypt is a global call to action to end poverty, protect the Earth's environment and climate, and ensure that people everywhere can enjoy peace and prosperity. These are the goals the UN is working on in Egypt. The UN promotes sustainable development through providing evidence-based policy advice, support to institutional capacity building and strengthening, and providing direct support and services to beneficiaries. In 2015, the United Nations and its 193 member countries adopted the ambitious Sustainable Development Goals (SDGs), a 15-year plan that addresses 17 global and interconnected issues, including the reduction in poverty and hunger, putting an end to discrimination, and preventing the long-term consequences of climate change. The UN and its partners in Egypt are working towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, 17 interconnected and ambitious goals which address the major development challenges faced by people in Egypt and around the world. Figure 1 listed the 17 interconnected and ambitious goals. Egypt is among 10 countries worldwide that is submitting its third VNR this year. While the first was submitted in 2016, following the launch of the National Sustainable Development Strategy Egypt Vision 2030, the second VNR presented in 2018 marked the successful implementation of the Economic Stabilization and Reform Program, whereas the third VNR would share with the international community Egypt's strides to lay the foundations for more resilient economy and community capable of weathering adverse unexpected shocks such as COVID-19 pandemic. Before the outbreak of COVID-19, Egypt was on an upbeat trajectory to achieve its development targets. Unfortunately, the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic and its socio-economic impacts stormed the whole world, leading to an unprecedented global recession. Despite the adverse shock on the Egyptian economy, still the successful implementation of the Economic Stabilization and Reform Program, which enhanced the resilience of the economy, diluted the effect of the pandemic, leaving the Egyptian economy among the very few and the only country in the MENA region to register positive growth. The government of Egypt is convinced that despite the woes of the pandemic, it can be rendered as a catalyst to expedite the implementation of reforms. Consequently, GO has launched the second phase of the economic reform program in 2021, aiming at streamlining the structure of the Egyptian economy and raising its competitiveness by targeting sectoral bottlenecks. The GO, together with all the stakeholders, have worked together to deal with the challenges identified in Egypt's second VNR 2018. In terms of FFD, 2020 marked the issuing of the first green bond in Egypt and in the MENA region. The issuing, which was extremely successful, not only adds to the diversification of finance tools at the disposal of the GO, but also would push the agenda of greenifying public. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, adopted by all United Nations member states in 2015, provides a shared blueprint for peace and prosperity for people and the planet, now and into the future. At its heart are the 17 Sustainable Development Goals (SDGs), which are an urgent call for action by all countries developed and developing in a global partnership. They recognize that ending poverty and other deprivations must go hand in hand with strategies that improve health and education, reduce inequality, and spur economic growth, all while tackling climate change and working to preserve our oceans and forests. In line with the 2030 Agenda, the Egyptian government has launched in 2016 a working plan called Egypt's Vision 2030, also known as Sustainable Development Strategy (SDS). In 2019, Egypt has decided to revisit its SDS to assure having an interdependence of the three sustainable development dimensions: environment, society, and economy. Inspired by the ancient Egyptian civilization, linking the present to future, the SDS Egypt Vision 2030 represents a foothold on the way towards inclusive development, thus cultivating a prosperity path through economic and social justice, and reviving the role of Egypt in regional leadership. SDS represents a roadmap for maximizing competitive advantage to achieve the dreams and aspirations of Egyptians in a dignified and decent life. It also represents an embodiment of the new constitution's spirit, setting welfare and prosperity as the main economic objectives to be achieved via sustainable development, social justice, and a balanced geographical and sectoral growth. Therefore, SDS has been developed according to a participatory strategic planning approach, as various civil society representatives, national and international development partners, and government agencies have collaborated to set comprehensive objectives for all pillars and sectors of the country. The Sustainable Development Strategy (SDS) Egypt Vision 2030 SDS has Civil society has a powerful contribution to make in both framing and implementing effective sustainable development policies. The European Economic and Social Committee (ESC) has drawn up an inclusive and comprehensive agenda that puts all three sustainability pillars, social, economic, and environmental, on an equal footing. We are calling for a green economy roadmap with specific goals, targets, actions, and mechanisms. However, we firmly believe that such a roadmap needs to be placed in the context of an overarching strategy that also puts the emphasis on the right type of development and on the social dimension, including respect for social rights, decent work and employment conditions, and job opportunities. In particular, such a strategy should empower and involve civil society at all levels of the process as we seek to achieve more sustainable and greener societies. As to the views and expectations of non-EU countries, I know that civil society organizations from the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa, and African, Caribbean, and Pacific countries share many of the messages that the ESC has been putting forward to EU and global decision makers. We have worked with them to present a joint position to the world leaders gathered in Rio. Civil society has a powerful contribution to make in both framing and implementing effective sustainable development policies. On the date that this letter is published, it will be pushing for tangible commitments and meaningful results in Rio. Private sector plays an important role in the sustainable development strategy worldwide. A report entitled Expanding Opportunities for the Egyptian Private Sector in the Post-COVID Era is presented at September 29, 2022. The outlines of this report will be highlighted in this presentation. It is stated that this report is the third edition in a series of business reports in Egypt, looks at the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on private sector companies in Egypt, aiming to capture companies' experiences and insights in responding to these impacts and in the aftermath of the pandemic, and to provide a roadmap for sustainable recovery and future growth in the post-COVID era. Egypt is considering dozens of national green and sustainable development projects as part of the government's plan to adapt to climate change and switch to green sustainable development as it prepares to host the UN Climate Change Conference. Ahead of the United Nations Climate Change Conference 2022 COP27 that Egypt is hosting in November, the government is considering selecting 18 national green and sustainable development projects out of 6,281 projects competing in the National Initiative for Green and Sustainable Development to benefit from international or regional funding. The move falls within the scope of the government's plans to expand implementation and obtain adequate funding for climate adaptation and green sustainable development projects. Egypt aims to implement these projects in tandem with hosting COP27 in an attempt to fulfill the climate change-related international commitments as per the Paris Agreement.
Every day, huge amounts of food is thrown away, piling up in landfills. As it decomposes, food waste releases dangerous greenhouse gases and contributes to atmospheric pollution and climate change. Vanguard Renewables has a smarter solution: farm-powered food waste recycling. With the farm-powered solution, instead of a landfill, your food waste is transported to a farm and combined with farm waste in a Vanguard Renewables anaerobic digester to produce renewable energy. The process solves food waste challenges, reduces greenhouse gas emissions by more than 85%, and generates valuable resources for the farm, including fertilizer, animal bedding, and heat. Companies generating more than 1 ton of food waste per week can visit foodwaste.com to get a customized plan and budget for clean, reliable farm-powered food waste collection and recycling. To learn more about a customized food waste solution for your company, visit www.foodwaste.com today.
10 tons of food goes unsold every day at this market. But instead of going to a landfill, it's turned into electricity that will power streetlights, buildings, and a kitchen that preps meals for 800 people. This is called biogas. It's plentiful, it's low-tech, and experts say it burns cleaner than any fossil fuel. So why can't we make energy from the 1.3 billion tons of food that gets thrown out every year? We visited the Boinpalli market in Hyderabad, India to find out. The first step is to chop up larger vegetables and load them onto a conveyor belt. Some of the vegetables are spoiled. Others are thrown away because it costs farmers too much to transport them back home.
वो सड़ जाएगा तो फ़ायदा क्या भी नहीं है तरकारी में उसके लिए वो भी बायोगैस प्लांट के लिए यूज़ कर ले रहा.
The conveyor belt carries the material to a shredder, which further breaks down the food into smaller, more uniform particles. In a single day, it handles the same amount of vegetables that 150 Indians eat in a year. A grinder crushes the mixture into pulp, which is pumped through underground tanks and into 2 digesters.
So anaerobic digesters basically have bacteria which operate in the absence of oxygen, or anaerobic bacteria, and they actually eat essentially the food waste that we are putting in there and give out methane and carbon dioxide.
Any organic materials emit these planet-warming gases as they decompose. But the massive amount of food waste makes landfills the 3rd largest source of human-caused methane emissions, just behind fossil fuels and agriculture. Burning biogas to make electricity is a way to harvest those gases before they enter the atmosphere. At Boinpalli, the fuel can be stored locally in 4 huge balloons until it's ready to use.
And it goes all the way to the kitchen, which is about roughly 400-500 meters away from here.
It's enough power to run a canteen kitchen that serves roughly 800 meals per day. Aside from energy, the plant creates another valuable byproduct: fertilizer. Farmers who sell their wares at the market buy it back and spread it on the same fields where their vegetables grow.
By using this fertilizer, their soils are also getting better, their crop yields are better, and their crops are being sold at higher cost, because organic vegetables and all very costly nowadays, organic rice and all these things.
Dr. Rao, a scientist on the project, is already building 5 more plants around the city. And it isn't limited to vegetables. Biogas can be produced from any organic material, including animal and human feces. So if biogas can be locally sourced, cuts down on solid waste, and reduces emissions, why aren't we all doing this? Because in most countries, it's still cheaper to keep burning fossil fuels. In North America, biogas costs nearly 5 times more than natural gas.
Now, you can't compete with what you call gas in the United States if it's 20 cents a gallon.
This gap is smaller in places like Asia, where the difference in price is less than $2 per unit.
A lot of people, a lot of state governments who were thinking about setting up these projects have suddenly understood that yes, it's possible to do it. Yes, there are technologies which are indigenous, which are built in India that can work for them.
The world's biggest biogas plant was recently built in Denmark, and new facilities are being built elsewhere in Europe and Africa. An Israeli company sells a product to make biogas in your backyard. Biogas will never replace natural gas. There's just not enough waste to keep up with the demand for electricity. But it does something that natural gas can't. It helps reduce landfill waste. And it's a huge missed opportunity in the United States, which throws out between 30 and 40% of all food. Even the farmers who lose money when they can't sell their produce believe biogas is better than just throwing it away.
सड़ गए तो माल बेच देना पड़ता, क्या करते नहीं बेचते, उन डालते उसमें वेस्टेज में वो अच्छा काम कर रहा हो.
And the engineers on the Boinpalli project are hopeful that its success will inspire others.
So these projects have to happen, for us to make life more sustainable, not just for ourselves, but for, let's say, in 20 years or 10 years down the line, the scenario needs to be a little better.
Recycling just makes you feel good. But what actually happens to all the plastic bottles? This does not happen. Bottles do not magically become fresh new bottles. The story is actually much more interesting. We're going to focus on polyethylene terephthalate, or PET, the type of plastic with a 1 printed on the bottom. The ethylene terephthalate refers to this. String a bunch of these together and you get polyethylene terephthalate, a durable, flexible plastic that can be heated up and molded into lots of convenient shapes. After you recycle a plastic bottle, it gets hauled off and sent to a recycling plant. They take off the labels and clean it and separate all of the PET bottles, not just from the glass and metal and paper, but also from the other kinds of plastic. That's because different types of polymers do not always play well together. For example, polyvinyl chloride, which most of the pipes in your home are probably made of, can totally ruin a batch of PET. You have to heat up a batch of PET so much just to soften and mold it that the PVC will start to chemically break down and produce hydrochloric acid, which can actually degrade the PET. So sorting is super important, and so is cleaning to remove as much impurity as possible. In this case, that includes both things like that last backwashy sip of soda and other kinds of plastic. That's one major factor in why it's both hard and expensive to recycle bottles into more bottles. But when the plastic isn't good enough for recycling into more bottles, it's still sometimes good enough to spin into fiber for clothing or carpets or whatever else you use fiber for. Which, incidentally, is now called polyester, even though chemically, it hasn't changed. That's right, most polyester and PET plastic are chemically the same thing. The plastic is just ground and shredded and melted until it can be spun into thread and then woven into fabric. This type of recycling is sometimes called downgrading, because once the plastic becomes fabric, it can no longer be recycled again. There is also a form of recycling that changes the chemistry of PET, and is in fact called chemical recycling. It requires putting enough energy into the plastic to break the chemical bonds holding the polymer together, converting PET back into its individual parts. These molecules can be used to remake PET, or even made into different types of plastic, but chemical recycling is really expensive, so we don't do it very much. So that's why bottles become clothes and not new bottles, because making bottles requires super clean plastic, and that's tough to get. But even though going from a plastic bottle to a handbag is technically a downgrade, at least it's much cuter now, right? Right? Before you go, we want to tell you about Reinventors, which is a new show from PBS Digital Studios and KCTS 9 in Seattle that will introduce you to the scientists and tinkerers in the Pacific Northwest on the cutting edge of green technology. They'll try edible plastic, which I have to say is not something we encountered in the production of this video, so you don't have to, and bring you to unexpected places like a garage in Seattle with a nuclear reactor. Check out Reinventors and subscribe to them at the link in the description. Thanks for watching. There's a whole lot more to recycling that we haven't touched on, so leave your questions and discussion in the comments below. And be sure to subscribe, share, and turn on notifications so I continue to get paid so I can buy more trendy, recycled, overpriced thanks to the Feel Good Factor handbags. We'll see you next week.
Welcome to MTM Plastics, located in the heart of Germany, the technology leader in Europe for the recycling of mixed plastics. 80 employees produce approximately 30,000 tons of granules from used plastics every year. We invite you to take a look inside our company and see our manufacturing process. The raw materials, received from either household waste or bulky waste collections, are short-lived product packaging or discarded consumer goods such as bobby cars, old garden chairs, and other rigid plastic waste. In Germany and some other European countries, household plastic packaging waste, along with other lightweight packaging, is collected in yellow bags or bins. Waste management companies regularly bring the bags to sorting plants, where the waste is automatically pre-sorted. Bales of pre-sorted recyclable plastics of roughly 1 cubic meter and 400 kilograms in weight are subsequently delivered to MTM Plastics. For bulky waste, MTM Plastics work closely together with a growing number of communities in Germany and France, and receives pre-sorted materials predominantly from rigid polyethylene and polypropylene. The bales are delivered to the dry mechanical treatment area, where 6 large shredders reduce the plastic parts to roughly 6 centimeters in size. Magnetic and eddy current metal separators extract remaining metal parts. Other contaminants are removed by wind sifters, so the material is largely exempt from any unwanted components such as metals, wood and glass. After further shredding to about 2 centimeters, the materials reach the heart of the production, a combined washing and separating system. To obtain clean polyolefin flakes for the granulation, any remaining other plastics such as PET, PS or PVC and any paper buildup is removed. The shredded plastic materials are cleanly segregated according to density and at the same time thoroughly washed in 3 unique centrifugal separators per line. The resulting polyolefin ground material is subsequently thermally dried. It is here where most of MTM's production waste is separated from the targeted polyolefins. This production waste also contributes ecological benefits as it is delivered to the cement industry for high-end RDF energy recovery. Rigid plastics from bulky waste complete an important extra step before granulation: separation by type and color. In extruders, the material is densified and melted at temperatures between 180 and 240 degrees Celsius. The molten mass is mixed with the required additives and plasticized, during which it is very finely filtered, double degassed under vacuum, and homogenized. Finally, the typical cylindrical granules are formed under water. The result is high-quality repolyolefins and compounds for further processing into new plastic products in both the B2B and B2C sectors. Online during production and again prior to delivery, the company's own laboratory takes several samples of each batch and analyzes its characteristics to guarantee our customers the accustomed consistently high quality. The finished and tested granules are packaged for transport, usually in big bags. Under the brand names Dipolane and Purpolane, our repolyolefins are delivered to plastic converters inside and outside Europe. Our customers then transform the recycled material into diverse and durable products. Thank you for watching.